Or what's the problem with the inflation rate in housing being 19%? It's an awful problem for a 22-year-old that's starting their first job, that's saving money to buy a house. But it would be characterized as a benefit to society by a conventional economist who would say, well, housing asset values are higher because of interest rate fluctuation, and now the economy's got more wealth. And so that's
Right.
that's viewed as a benefit.
So what's being missed here, like the suffering of the average person, or the struggle, the suffering, the pain of the average person, like metrics that captured that within the economic system. Is it when you're talking about
One way to say it is a conventional view of inflation as CPI understates the human misery that's inflicted upon the working class and on mainstream companies by the political class. And so it's a massive shift of wealth from the working class to the propertied class. It's a massive shift of power from the free market to the centrally governed or the controlled market. It's a massive shift of power from the people to the government. And maybe one more illustrative point here, Lex, is what do you think the inflation rate's been for the past 100 years?
Are we talking about the Saylor again?
If you took a survey of everybody on the street and you asked them, what do they think inflation was? What is it? You remember when Jerome Powell said our target's 2%, but we're not there? If you go around the corner, I have posted the deed to this house, sold in 1930. Okay, and the number on that deed is $100,000, 1930. And if you go on Zillow, and you get the Z estimate.
Is it higher than that? No.
$30,500,000.
Yeah.
So that's 92 years, 1930 or 2022. And in 92 years, we've had 305x increase in price of the house. Now, if you actually back calculate, you come to a conclusion that the inflation rate was approximately 6.5% a year, every year, for 92 years. Okay, and there's nobody in government, no conventional economist that would ever admit to an inflation rate of 7% a year in the US dollar over the last century. Now, if you dig deeper, I mean, one guy that's done a great job working on this is Saifedean Ammous, who wrote the book, The Bitcoin Standard, and he notes that on average, it looks like the inflation rate and the money supply is about 7% a year, all the way up to the year 2020. If you look at the S&P index, which is a market basket of scarce desirable stocks, it returned about 10%. If you talk to 10% a year for 100 years, the money supply is expanding at 7% 100 years. If you actually talk to economists or you look at the economy and you ask the question, how fast does the economy grow in its entirety year over year? Generally about 2 to 3%. Like the sum total impact of all this technology and human ingenuity might get you a 2.5–3% improvement a year.
As measured by GDP. Is that are you okay with that?
I'm not sure I'd go that far yet, but I would just say that if you had the human race doing stuff,
yeah,
and if you ask the question, how much more efficiently will we do the stuff next year than this year, or what's the value of all of our innovations and inventions and investments in the past 12 months, you'd be hard pressed to say we get 2% better. Typical investor thinks they're 10% better every year. So if you look at what's going on, really, when you're holding $1 million of stocks and you're getting a 10% gain a year, you really get a 7% expansion of the money supply. You're getting a 2 or 3% gain under best circumstances. And another way to say that is, if the money supply stopped expanding at 7% a year, the S&P yield might be 3% and not 10%. It probably should be. Now that gets you to start to ask a bunch of other fundamental questions, like If I borrow $1 billion and pay 3% interest, and the money supply expands at 7 to 10% a year, and I ended up making a 10% return on a $1 billion investment, paying 3% interest, is that fair? And who suffered so that I could do that? Because in an environment where you're just inflating the money supply and you're holding the assets constant, it stands to reason that the price of all the assets is going to appreciate somewhat proportional to the money supply. And the difference in asset appreciations is going to be a function of the scarce desirable quality of the assets, and to what extent can I make more of them, and to what extent are they truly limited in supply.
Yeah, so we'll get to a lot of the words you said there, the scarcity, and so connected to how limited they are, and the value of those assets. But you also said, so the expansion of the money supply, which is, put another way, is printing money. And so is that always bad, the expansion of the money supply? Is this just to put some terms on the table so we understand them? You nonchalantly say it's always on average expanding every year. The money supply is expanding every year by 7%. That's a bad thing? That's universally a bad thing.
It's awful. Well, I guess to be precise, it's the currency. Money. I would say money is monetary energy or economic energy, and the economic energy has to find its way into a medium. So if you want to move it rapidly as a medium of exchange, it has to find its way into currency. But the money can also flow into property, like a house or gold. If the money flows into property, it'll probably hold its value much better. If the money flows into currency, right? If you had put $100,000 in this house, you would have 305x return over 92 years. But if you had put the money, $100,000 in a safe deposit box and buried it in the basement, you would have lost 99.7% of your wealth over the same time period. So the expansion of the currency creates a massive inefficiency in the society, what I'll call an adiabatic lapse. It's what we're doing is we're bleeding the civilization to death. Right?
What's the adiabatic? What's that word? That's
adiabatic lapse.
Adiabatic.
Right. In aerospace engineering, you want to solve any problem, they start with the phrase, assume an adiabatic system. And what that means is a closed system.
Okay.
So I've got a container, and in that container, no air leaves and no air enters, no energy exits or enters. So it's a closed system.
So you got the closed system lapse.
Okay. What's a closed? Okay. I'm going to use
there's a leak in the ship.
I'm going to use a physical metaphor for you because you're the jiu-jitsu, right? Like you got 10 pints of blood in your body. Mm-hmm. And so before your next workout, I'm going to take 1 pint from you. Mm-hmm. Now you're going to go exercise, but you're 1 pint. You've lost 10% of your blood. Okay. You're not going to perform as well. It takes about 1 month for your body to replace the red blood platelets. So what if I tell you every month you got to show up and I'm going to bleed you?
Yeah.
Okay. So if I'm draining the energy, I'm draining the blood from your body, you can't perform. Adiabatic lapse is when you go up in altitude. Every 1,000 feet, you lose 3 degrees. You go at 50,000 feet, you're 150 degrees colder than sea level. That's why you look at your instruments, and instead of 80 degrees, you're minus 70 degrees. Why is the temperature falling? Temperature's falling because it's not a closed system, it's an open system. As the air expands, the density falls, right? The energy per cubic whatever, falls, and therefore the temperature falls, right? The heat's falling out of the solution. So when you're inflating, let's say you're inflating the currency supply by 6%, you're sucking 6% of the energy out of the fluid that the economy is using to function.
So the currency, this kind of ocean of currency, that's a nice way for the economy to function. It's the most kind of it's being inefficient when you expand the money supply, but it's the liquid. I'm trying to find the right kind of adjective here. It's how you do transactions at a scale of billions.
Currency is the asset we use to move monetary energy around, and you could use the dollar, or you could use the peso, or you could use the bolivar.